Let's get started. Start with listening, and then learn new words and practice them in sentences.
Have you ever wondered how different crimes are handled in the United States? In this vast country, the legal system is divided between state and federal courts, each with its own distinct role in maintaining law and order. Crimes in the United States can be prosecuted at two levels, the state level and the federal level. State courts are the workhorses of the criminal justice system, handling the majority of criminal cases. These include common offenses such as theft, assault, and driving under the influence. Essentially, if a law is broken that is defined by the state itself, it's the state courts that get involved. On the other hand, federal courts step in for cases that go beyond state boundaries or break federal laws. This includes crimes like drug trafficking across state lines, immigration offenses, and cases of national security. Federal courts have the authority to handle these complex matters because they often involve multiple states or need a uniform enforcement of federal laws. So, whether a crime is handled by a state or federal court can depend on the nature of the offense and where it took place. Now, you may be wondering, how is the U.S. court system structured? The United States has a dual court system, consisting of state courts and federal courts, each with its own structures and areas of responsibility. Let's start with the state courts. Each of the 50 states has its own court system, which handles the vast majority of legal disputes and criminal cases within that state. These can range from family law cases to criminal trials. The structure typically starts with trial courts at the lowest level, where cases begin, and can move up through appellate courts if the decision is appealed. On the other hand, the federal court system deals with issues that cross state boundaries or involve federal laws. At the base of this system are the federal district courts, which serve as the trial courts for federal law. Above these are the federal appellate courts, known as the U.S. Courts of Appeals, which review decisions made by the district courts. At the top sits the U.S. Supreme Court, which has the final say on interpreting the Constitution and federal law. Now, how are cases processed differently? In state courts, procedures and sentencing can vary widely because each state has its own laws and regulations. For example, what might be a severe penalty in one state could be less so in another. Federal courts, however, follow the federal rules of procedure and federal sentencing guidelines, which are consistent across all states. This means that a federal court case in California is handled much the same way as one in New York. Moreover, legal standards can also differ. State courts are primarily governed by the laws and constitutions of their respective states, while federal courts must adhere to the U.S. Constitution and federal statutes. This distinction can lead to different outcomes in cases that might seem similar at first glance. Thus, the way a case is handled can vary greatly depending on whether it's in a state or federal court. Let's look at some examples of crimes that can be handled by both state and federal courts. Imagine a case of drug trafficking. If someone is caught selling illegal drugs within the boundaries of a single state, this crime is typically handled by the state court. However, if drugs are transported across state lines, it becomes a matter for federal courts. This is because crossing state lines involves more than one state and often requires a broader legal perspective that federal courts are equipped to provide. Now let's talk about white-collar crimes, which include offenses like fraud or embezzlement. These crimes can also be prosecuted at both the state and federal levels. For instance, if someone commits fraud by deceiving a local business, state courts generally take charge. But if the fraud involves large sums of money or affects victims in multiple states, federal courts may step in. Federal courts have the resources and jurisdiction to handle complex cases that have a wide impact. Another interesting example is computer crimes, such as hacking or cyber theft. These crimes often involve crossing state or even international borders through the digital space, thus often falling under federal jurisdiction. However, if the impact is localized and the victims are within one state, the state courts might handle the prosecution. Prosecutors decide whether to pursue charges in state or federal court based on several factors. These include the nature and scope of the crime, the jurisdictions involved, and specific legal strategies. For instance, federal courts might be chosen if the crime involves federal laws, affects interstate commerce, or has national security implications. The decision-making process is complex and aims to ensure that justice is served in the most effective manner. By choosing the appropriate jurisdiction, prosecutors can leverage specific laws and resources that are most suitable for handling the case. These examples highlight how the decision to prosecute a crime at the state or federal level can depend on a variety of factors. Why is it important to understand these distinctions between state and federal courts? Imagine you are living or traveling in the United States. It's essential to have a basic understanding of how the legal system operates, as this knowledge can significantly impact your experience. Understanding the difference between state and federal courts is not just about legal theory. It's about knowing your rights and responsibilities under the law. State and federal courts differ in the types of cases they handle, which can affect anyone directly or indirectly. For instance, if you're involved in a legal dispute, or if you're curious about how justice is served in the U.S., knowing which court system can deal with which type of case helps clarify many aspects of the legal process. Moreover, each court system has its own set of rules, procedures, and sentencing guidelines. The variation in procedures means that the process of legal resolution can differ significantly depending on whether a case is taken to a state or a federal court. For example, federal courts generally have stricter procedural rules compared to state courts, which can influence the duration and outcome of legal proceedings. Additionally, understanding these courts' jurisdiction helps you comprehend the reach of their legal authority. State courts handle most criminal cases, including theft, assault, or driving offenses, which are more likely to affect everyday life. On the other hand, federal courts address issues that cross state lines or affect the entire nation, such as immigration laws and counterfeiting. This foundational knowledge assists in fostering a sense of security and preparedness. It enables you to better navigate any interactions with the legal system, whether they involve being a witness, serving on a jury, or even just following a high-profile court case in the news. Knowing the difference between state and federal courts can help you better understand how the U.S. legal system works and why certain crimes are prosecuted the way they are. This understanding not only demystifies aspects of governance, but also enhances your awareness and engagement with the community and nation, especially if you are living in or visiting the United States. Let's recap what we've learned today. In the United States, crimes can be prosecuted at two main levels, the state and the federal level. State courts generally handle the vast majority of criminal cases dealing with violations of state laws. These might include crimes like theft, assault, or driving under the influence. On the other hand, federal courts take on cases that involve violations of federal laws. This includes crimes that cross state lines or involve federal property. Examples include drug trafficking and certain types of white-collar crimes like bank fraud. We also discussed the structure of the U.S. court system, which includes state courts, federal district courts, and federal appellate courts. Each has its own jurisdiction and set of responsibilities. Understanding the differences in how cases are processed, including variations in procedures, sentencing guidelines, and legal standards, is crucial. This knowledge is especially important for anyone living in or visiting the United States, as it affects how justice is pursued and administered. Remember, understanding these distinctions is key to comprehending how the U.S. legal system operates. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the U.S. legal landscape.
Let's learn new words and practice English at level A2. State law. State law, laws that are made and enforced by individual states in the U.S. Example, state law differs from one state to another, and state prosecutors handle crimes under these laws. Federal law. Federal law, laws passed by the national government of the United States that apply to the entire country. Example, federal laws are handled by federal prosecutors and typically involve crimes that affect multiple states or national security. Jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, the official power to make legal decisions and judgments. Example, federal courts have jurisdiction over federal law cases, while state courts handle those under state law. Prosecutor. Prosecutor, a lawyer who conducts the case against a defendant in a criminal court. Example, both state and federal legal systems have prosecutors, but their cases depend on whether the crime violates state or federal laws. Crime. Crime, an action or omission that constitutes an offense that may be prosecuted by the state and is punishable by law. Example, crimes like robbery can be prosecuted under state law, but if they involve federal institutions, federal prosecution may be necessary.